On July 13, 1994, in Prescott Valley, Arizona, law enforcement vice officers would search a suspected stolen moving truck with a mysterious running freezer inside. They believed they were about to bust a hidden drug operation, but what they found inside would chill them to their bones. What appeared to be a woman's arm was peeking outside a large black trash bag, and a pool of bodily fluids had crystallized at the bottom of the freezer. Who was this woman? And what kind of monster of a human being laid her to rest inside this cold, dark grave? Hello, and welcome to Shades of Murder. I am your host, Alita Caldwell. Each week I explore cases of murder and attempt to unfold the layers of darkness that help make humans into monsters. Please be forewarned that each episode contains specific and at times very graphic and disturbing details of the case. This show is not intended for all audiences, and listener discretion is strongly advised. In this podcast, I have discussed more than once how the people in our personal lives, whether they are family members, a boyfriend, girlfriend, or an acquaintance, such as a coworker or a neighbor, pose a much higher threat to our well-being than strangers do. The most recent collective data from the FBI in 2017 indicated that strangers committed 9.7% of homicides, versus 12.3% where the offender and victim were related, and 28% who were known by the victim but not related. Simply put, we are much more likely to be killed by someone we know. Considering how rare homicide is, the chances of being murdered by a total stranger are extremely low. But the concept of stranger danger continues to be shared through the generations as a tale of caution, for good reason. Some of the most horrific crimes in history have been perpetrated by people who have never seen their victims until the moment they are chosen. And some of the most sadistic predators have not been serial killers, or at least they never got the chance to become one. This is the story of Denise Huber of Newport Beach, California. Newport Beach, California is one of the most picturesque beach towns in the world, made globally famous by the fictionalized teen drama The O.C. in the early 2000s. The beachfront mansions, luxury automobiles, and elite lifestyles portrayed in the show are not really an elaboration for many residents who call the city and the surrounding beach towns home. Hailing from a much simpler way of life back in Texas, Denise Huber's parents decided to relocate to Southern California in the late 1980s. The family easily fell in love with its moderate temperatures, sandy beaches, and laid-back environment. Denise was especially thrilled to call California her new home. Denise Huber was a sweet, easygoing little girl who adored animals so much that she thought about pursuing a career as a vet. She grew into a strikingly beautiful, warm, and intelligent young woman. In 1991, she had recently graduated with a social science degree from UC Irvine. She was living at home with her parents while working at a restaurant in the interim while she decided what next she wanted to do with her life. While working at the locally famous Old Spaghetti Factory, she met Steve, Rob, and Debbie, and the four young people instantly became like a family. She had a passion for music and art and was a big fan of Morrissey. The once lead singer of the new wave British group The Smiths, he had recently embarked on his own. It was on the night of Morrissey's concert in Inglewood, California, a city close to downtown Los Angeles, when 23-year-old Denise Huber vanished without a trace. When Denise never returned home from the concert that night, her mother was immediately concerned. It was not like her daughter to just not come home, and if she had decided to stay with her friends overnight, she could trust that she would have heard from her. The next day, Denise still did not return home, and they did everything they could think of to locate their daughter. Her family contacted Denise's friend Rob, who had attempted the Morrissey concert with her the night before, but he said that Denise had been on her way back home after she had dropped him off. Her parents called around to everyone they knew in Denise's social circle, but no one had information as to where she might be. They called local hospitals, but Denise was nowhere to be found. Then the morning hours turned into dusk, and her mother began to panic. When she reached out to her best girlfriend, Tammy, she also had not heard from her. Since she was very concerned about her friend, Tammy decided to drive the same route Denise would have taken on her way back from dropping off Rob. While driving on the highway off Ramp 73, she spotted Denise's blue Honda, parked along the shoulder of the roadway. When Tammy arrived at the vehicle, she noticed one of the tires was flat and the vehicle was dead. Tammy had a huge knot in her stomach. She dreaded calling Denise's family to tell them that she had found her car, but there was no sign of Denise. When Denise's mother, Ione, received the call, her feelings of growing panic turned into a deep fear. The worried parents rushed over to the site of Denise's vehicle. Once there, they peeked inside the window. Her mother noticed that there was a pair of tights on the seat. Denise was known for removing her tights after a long night out, so she was more comfortable while driving. Her purse and car keys were nowhere in sight. Her parents immediately contacted the local police station and reported Denise missing. Police searched the area of Denise's abandoned vehicle extensively. Several helicopters scanned the location and canine units were employed, but nothing was ever found. The dogs had followed Denise's scent for about 75 yards, but then her scent became lost. The police interviewed her parents the following day and tried to determine who could have been in her life, who wanted to cause her harm. There was no one. Denise had a few close friends and was not involved in anything they knew of to be dangerous or illegal. To the best of their knowledge, she wasn't into the party scene much beyond sometimes drinking with her friends. She was close with her family and was not the kind of young woman who would just run off on a whim. Denise's mother, Ione, was frantic and became overwhelmed with sickness. She felt sharp jolts of pain as if someone had kicked her in the stomach. Ione Huber could not sleep. The worried, sick mother could not eat anything for several days. The first suspect on the police's list was her friend Rob, who was the last person to have seen her the night Denise vanished. The police interviewed him several times as to the sequence of events that night in question and the nature of their relationship. Rob finally admitted to having a crush on Denise, but he said she only wanted to be friends and he was fine with that. Rob's friend Steve, who was a bartender at the old spaghetti factory where they all worked together, had been the one to buy the tickets for Denise, but ended up having to work too late. He didn't want to disappoint Denise, so he asked Rob to take her to the concert. Law enforcement officers were suspicious of his story, but once he was willing to take a polygraph, which he passed, and the story about the concert was confirmed by Steve, the police backed off of Rob. The problem was that they had no other suspects. The Hubers did everything they could to find their beloved daughter Denise. In addition to reporting her as a missing person immediately, they made flyers and sent them to businesses and newspapers all around the country. They even created a 6-foot by 30-foot sized banner, which they placed on the roof of a residential complex that overlooked the location where her vehicle had been discovered. On the banner were the words, "Have you seen?" along with a picture of their daughter, a physical description, and the phone number for the Costa Mesa police. Several television stations interviewed the parents. It was noted by her friend Debbie that Denise's story was covered an average of once a week. The stretch of highway that her vehicle had been found on covered a pretty small area and had the same frequent travelers. This led the police to stake out the highway and write down every vehicle's license plate they saw. They then wrote letters to each person associated with the vehicle, asking them if they knew anything about the missing young woman or if they had seen anything suspicious the night of her disappearance. It really is incredible the lengths the police went to, in addition to the media, to find Denise Huber. Of course, it was a reflection of her being a beautiful young woman from a very affluent town. But these types of vanishings were pretty much unheard of at the time in this safe, privileged area of Southern California. The community was not only freaked out about such an event happening in their own backyard, so to speak, but they began to see Denise as their own daughter. Everyone in the community did everything they could to help. Thousands of tips flooded in, but nothing led to anything useful in the investigation. 4 months had passed and there were no signs as to where the young woman had gone. She was on the road, driving home one moment, and then there was no evidence of her existence. Denise Huber had vanished without a trace. Then 3 years later, in the mountains of northern Arizona, the mysterious disappearance of this young woman would take a turn in the worst imaginable way. In the early 1990s, empty nesters Jack and Elaine Court relocated to the Prescott Valley area to retire. For extra income, they sold paint sundries at a local swap meet. In July 1994, the couple met a new man there named John at the flea market who was selling paint-related merchandise. Since they had that in common, the couple accepted his offer to pick up some products from his home nearby. John's residence was a beautiful and very spacious white house in the Prescott Valley Country Club. When the couple arrived, they noticed something was off. In John's back garden sat a moving truck. When John left to go back inside his residence, the couple noticed that there was a Ryder rental truck with heavy layers of grass and weeds that had grown up around its sides. He had told the man that he had moved to the area about 6 months earlier, but the truck appeared to have been abandoned for years, given how much the grass had grown up over the tires. They bought the supplies from John without any issue and left amicably. Something did not sit right with them, though, about the truck or the man, and concerned that the vehicle was stolen, the couple secretly wrote down the truck's license plate before leaving his property. On July 13, 1994, the next day after meeting John, a deputy police officer who bought products from the retired couple from time to time came over to their home. The couple reported their concern to him about this possibly stolen truck. When Deputy Sheriff Joseph Michael DiGiacomo received the call about the possibly stolen vehicle, he rode up to the house to check out the situation. Upon his arrival, he attempted to make contact with the listed resident, but the person never picked up their phone. The deputy immediately noticed a 24-foot Ryder truck parked in the driveway. The VIN matched a truck that had been reported stolen in Orange County, California, 6 months prior. Deputy DiGiacomo decided to perform an inventory of the contents of the vehicle before it was towed away. However, the truck was locked. Then he noticed something very peculiar: chemical bottles sitting outside the truck, which were concerning since it could pose a hazardous risk. Even odder was that there was a power cord running between the rear of the truck under the back door over into the suspect's fence and into his backyard. This was very strange, the deputy thought to himself, and he made it his top priority to get inside that truck. He never could have imagined what was hidden inside. When the locksmith arrived and unlocked the padlock on the back door, Deputy DiGiacomo noticed how the truck was filled with various paints and painting tools. Then he discovered what the power cord was connected to. A freezer sat there running, but it was locked and sealed with masking tape. Deputy D. Giacomo believed he had stumbled upon a mobile drug lab and immediately contacted local narcotics officers. Once the vice officers arrived, the locksmith unlocked the padlock on the freezer. Expecting to find drugs, the officers were thrown off when they cut into the masking tape, and a repulsive odor was released. One of the detectives reached his hand into the freezer only to find what appeared to be a human arm. What was believed to be a crime bust was now the scene of a gruesome homicide. Deputy D. Giacomo sealed off the truck and made a call to Yavapai County Sheriff's Department and asked to speak to Scott Masher, Lieutenant Supervisor of the Homicide and Major Crimes Unit. When Lieutenant Masher opened the freezer, he observed what appeared to be an arm. He also noticed what appeared to be bodily fluids that had pooled around the bottom of the freezer, which were now frozen. It was obvious from the ice crystals and frost on the trash bag that its contents had been inside for an extended period. Lieutenant Masher cut his way through 3 layers of trash bags before he fully understood what they had found. Inside lay a naked female body in the fetal position, frozen solid. The victim's hands had been bound behind her back with metal handcuffs. There was no evidence that the person had been murdered inside the freezer. Any identification of the victim was not present at the scene. While crime scene investigators and criminalists were processing the location, the potential suspect arrived home. He was strangely calm and did not resist going to the police station. During the initial interview, he cooperated with investigators until they began to inquire about the freezer. Then John, who was John Joseph Famolaro, climbed up, stated that he had nothing else to say, and asked for a lawyer. He was then taken into custody and arrested for theft of the truck and murder. Lieutenant Masher decided to seal up the truck again, this time having it towed away to Phoenix so it could be analyzed and tested by forensic pathologists. Dr. Ann Buckles conducted the external examination of the victim's body. It was observed how both the trash bags and the body itself were stuck in a frozen layer of fluid at the bottom of the freezer. She first collected samples from the mouth and anus of the victim. Next, with the aid of a hairdryer to thaw out part of her thighs, she was able to collect a sample from the vagina. This was critical to do first to preserve the evidence of a possible sexual assault. The head of the victim was wrapped in 3 white kitchen trash bags. When the trash bags were removed, the woman's face was covered with gray tape that ran from her mouth up to her eyelids. When her face began to thaw, a wad of material, most likely used to gag the victim, fell out. The victim's head had multiple external injuries. The handcuffs that were used to secure the victim were so tight that bolt cutters had to be used to remove them. Dr. Buckles described the victim's skull as being shattered. It had a seemingly endless number of curved and oval-shaped fractures and lacerations. The autopsy revealed that pieces of the trash bags wrapped around the victim's head had embedded themselves into her skull from the severity of the blows she had received. 2 doctors with expertise in human bone reconstruction aided Dr. Buckles in reconstructing the young woman's skull. It was determined that a minimum of 31 separate blows to the head the victim had endured. There were so many layers of fractures upon fractures on her skull that it was impossible to determine past this number. Interestingly, there were no visible signs of additional external trauma or any defensive wounds. It was also noted that despite how extremely snug the handcuffs were on the victim's wrists, there was no bruising. There was also no physical trauma done to her vagina or anus, although the doctor noted that this was not indicative of the absence of a sexual assault, just not necessarily damage. There simply was no physical damage to these areas of the body. It came as no surprise that the official cause of death was blunt force trauma. On July 14, 1994, only one day after the discovery of the woman's body in the freezer, law enforcement officers searched the residence of the suspect, Joseph John Famularo. Inside laid a hoarder's dream. All around the house were stacks of books, newspapers, and receipts. Amongst this clutter stood boxes neatly organized amongst the chaos. It was recorded that officers collected over 100,000 items from the residence. When they searched the garage, 2 boxes labeled Christmas were looked through, which did not contain any items related to the holiday. This evidence was recorded as boxes 212 and 213. Inside box 212 lay a large black trash bag that resembled the same kind that had held the victim's body. Within it were smaller boxes. When law enforcement officers opened the boxes, they found items of the victims. Inside were her purse, car keys, wallet, checkbooks, lipstick, makeup compact, a pin, and other items that were identified as being Denise Huber's, including credit cards and her driver's license. The clothing she was last known for having worn the night she vanished also lay neatly inside this box. Her black dress, her jacket, high heels, and her underwear had all been kept and stored as if they were his trophies from that night. It was noted that when the dress was pulled out, the shoulder strap on the left side was torn and frayed, as if it had been repeatedly tugged on. The tip of one of her high heels had broken off, and the back of the heels was scraped. The box that held her heels, keys, wallet, and checkbooks also had visible bloodstains. They had developed a nasty, strong odor and had become moldy over time. This was a treasure trove of circumstantial evidence that the officers were uncovering, one little box at a time. The next discovery was shocking and extremely important to build a strong case against the defendant. Inside this same box of her items and clothing was a hammer, a pair of men's jeans, and a sweatshirt, which were all splattered with blood. They also discovered several blood-soaked rags and a pair of surgical gloves, which had been turned inside out. Then box 213 was examined. It was immediately observed how the flaps of the box were stained with blood. The box in which the handcuffs were packaged was inside it. In addition, there was a roll of duct tape, more blood-soaked rags, a white plastic garbage bag that was similar to the type that the victim's head had been wrapped in, and a nail puller stained with blood. The duct tape was the kind that had been used to tape up her face, and the end of the tape matched precisely the tearing on the tape that had been found on the body. In a different corner of the suspect's garage sat another box. This one held a blood-stained tarp, and rolled inside of it was a shirt stained with blood. During the search, law enforcement officers located several weapons throughout the house in plain sight, including several firearms. The keys to the handcuffs were also discovered inside a desk drawer, and the key to the freezer had been left inside the Ryder truck. Investigators found the receipt for when the freezer had been purchased, with the suspect's signature. 9 days after Denise Huber's mysterious disappearance, the freezer had been bought and sent to his storage unit in Laguna Hills, California. As many other cases have shown to be true, it is pretty common for serial killers and other vicious predators to collect materials that highlight or feature the crime and the victim. The Orange County Register had featured the disappearance of Denise Huber in multiple issues, all of which the defendant had inside his home. He had also recorded a special Inside edition that featured the case of Denise Huber. It was also recorded and later shared with the media that it was not just her clothes and bags that had been discovered. In addition to a collection of Social Security cards, multiple pieces of women's clothing, and several purses were found in the suspect's garage. All of the evidence indicated that Denise Huber was not his only victim. Then, in the back of the basement, investigators made a terrifying discovery. A hidden underground room was dug out deeply into the ground. Police feared that they would find more bodies within this dirt chamber. They brought in cadaver dogs to search the secret space in addition to the entire backyard, but nothing was ever found. This didn't stop law enforcement's strong inclination to believe that they had stumbled upon a serial killer's lair. They reached out to other agencies to determine if similar cases existed. This led to one woman who claimed that she barely escaped the murderous clutches of their suspect, Joseph John Famularo. According to this woman, she had met the man in Phoenix. They decided to go out on a date, and at some point he drove her out in the middle of the desert. The man abruptly stopped the vehicle and attempted to strangle her. The woman bravely fought her assailant off and ran through the desert, nude and petrified, until she was safe. Although she immediately made an identification and a photo lineup of John Famularo once she was interviewed years later, this woman never reported the crime. The police believed without a doubt that they were dealing with a serial killer. If this horrible incident happened to this woman, imagine what could have been prevented if she had come forward with this assault. I am not in any way blaming her because this was a terrifying and traumatic experience, and we all deal with trauma and fear in our own way. However, this is an example of why it is so important that assaults of any nature are reported to the police. If we don't, we give predators the power and freedom to offend again. The Yavapai County Sheriff's Office contacted the Newport Beach Police Department inquiring if they had a missing person named Denise Huber. The head detective on the case, David Snowden of Newport Beach PD, confirmed that they did. Just like her family and friends, he and many of the law enforcement officers were heartbroken when they heard the news that the frozen body in the truck was likely Denise Huber's. That same afternoon, investigators from Costa Mesa flew up to Phoenix with her fingerprints to verify the identity of the victim. It was Denise Huber. The labels on both boxes 212 and 213 had been addressed to a warehouse in Laguna Hills, California, to the attention of Dragonfly. When Denise Huber had gone missing, the suspect was known to have been the owner and operator of a painting business. It was this same warehouse that he also called his residence. Dragonfly was in reference to an apparel manufacturer whose business was only a few units adjacent to his. The owner, Steve Parmentier, when interviewed by the police, told them that he recalled giving the same type of rags to the suspect, which police had found soaked in blood in the boxes of his garage. The manufacturing business generated waste material sometimes, which he had given Famularo on a few occasions. Criminalists searched and examined the defendant's former business warehouse. The front office had been made into a makeshift residence, with all the windows covered with tinfoil. Crime scene technicians went to the back of the warehouse and within a little closeted area of the workshop sprayed luminol. It revealed blood spatters all over the wall. Initial tests were found to be positive for traces of human blood that matched both Joseph Famularo and Denise Huber. Lori Crutchfield, a forensic analyst at the Orange County Crime Lab, also discovered some of the drywall and wood framing of the unit were chipped away. There was a concentrated, thick, deep red color between the concrete and wood floorboard. Investigators had found their crime scene. The following sequence of events is what the police believe happened on June 4th, 1991. While she was attempting to change her flat tire in the middle of the night, Joseph John Famularo was out looking for prey. There she was, a beautiful young woman with long dark hair, wearing a sexy little black dress and heels. She was like out of a dream. Stranded by her car in the middle of the night, all alone. He pulled over and approached her. While Denise was bent down trying to fix the tire, he swung a hammer at her, striking her once in the head. Dragging her back to his truck, he placed Denise in handcuffs and drove her back to his paint warehouse. There he sexually assaulted her, gagged her, taped her mouth and eyes sealed, and wrapped 3 layers of trash bags around her head. He then pulled out a nail puller and stabbed her in the skull over and over and over and over again. Joseph Famularo saw red, and he bludgeoned her with the weapon more times than he could count. The triple trash bags wrapped around her head could not hold in the blood that sprayed across the walls and seeped out from the bags. It is not known where he hid her body for the first 24 hours, or even that first week, but most likely her body was somewhere within the warehouse. When he bought the freezer, he hired 2 guys to drive the trailer to Prescott Valley. He even asked them to pull over every few hours and plug in the freezer, since he had deer meat inside and he didn't want it to go bad. Once Joseph John Famularo relocated to Prescott Valley, it was believed that he held onto her body, intending to bury her and all of the evidence in the pit he had dug up under his house. It was never revealed as to why this plan would take him years. One of Anne Buchholz's colleagues, Mary Hong, conducted PCR DNA testing on these bloodstains, in addition to the nail puller that was found within the defendant's home and many other bloodstained items. PCR is also known as polymerase chain reaction, which is a quick and more affordable technique used to amplify or copy small segments of DNA. It was determined that the DNA was not the defendant's, but that it could belong to Denise Huber. The blood-soaked pair of men's jeans that had been collected from box 212 showed evidence that the blood was consistent with the victim's, as well as some, although weak, genetic markers that were found to be consistent with the suspect, Joseph Famularo. Much to the surprise and disappointment of law enforcement, the hammer which had been collected from the suspect's home did not contain any traces of DNA. Now, even more surprising was the lack of evidence found within the victim's anal and vaginal samples. Several tests by different forensic scientists were conducted, but none confirmed the presence of sperm. It was recorded that this was mainly due to a lack of visible tails on the sperm. Specifically, one test revealed that the sperm cell fraction was consistent with Denise's DNA, but not with the defendant's. It was proposed that there was a possible male who had contributed to the DNA instead, other than the defendant. However, during interviews with Denise's closest male friends, being Rob and Steve, they denied having any sexual relations with her. Forensic analyst Arnell, who performed the first set of testing, stated that the reasoning as to why the DNA test of the rectum samples failed to confirm the presence of sperm may have been due to the degradation or presence of such a low number, given that the body had been frozen and thus preserved for so long, this was even more of a surprise. Criminalist Edwin Jones with the Ventura County Sheriff's Department disagreed with this lack of findings. He claimed to have identified 5 cells of sperm, and since he had conducted thousands of microscopic examinations, he was confident his opinion was accurate. This conflicting DNA evidence was not much of benefit to the prosecution. On July 18, 1994, the murder trial of Joseph John Famularo would commence. The defendant entered a plea of not guilty. During the trial, it would be revealed that there were no signs that Denise Huber had been taken by force. When Costa Mesa police officers examined the area where her vehicle was located the day after she went missing, there was no blood, drag marks, or any visible evidence of a struggle inside or around her car. This, in addition to no DNA found on the hammer, effectively harmed the prosecution's depiction of the defendant attacking the victim with a hammer at her vehicle. There were also no traces of blood found within the white truck. This was the defendant's known vehicle while he lived in Orange County, which was later found at his residence in Prescott Valley, Arizona. A newspaper carrier named Cynthia Brown also testified for the defense. She observed a blue Honda, identified later as Denise Huber's vehicle, on the shoulder of the freeway with its emergency lights flashing around 2:25 a.m. the morning of June 3, 1991. Cynthia did not see anyone near the vehicle nor anyone at the emergency call boxes, which were in close walking distance. Beth Goss, an investigator for the defense, closely examined the embankment that lay adjacent to where Denise's vehicle was abandoned. Investigator Goss ran a test on how the heels would have been worn down by someone around Denise's height and weight if she had walked down and then walked back up the 64-foot embankment. Her results showed some damage to the heels were done, but nothing as severe as the damage that had been done to the back of Denise's heels. This evidence for the defense, in my opinion, doesn't help their case at all, so I'm not entirely sure why this would have been used in the trial. To me, this evidence shows that the damage done to Denise's heels was inflicted after she had been held captive. The use of handcuffs in the defendant's sex life were used by the prosecution to establish a pattern of forced bondage. Cheryl W., a girlfriend of the defendant's in 1987, testified to how he had used handcuffs as a way to secure and humiliate her during a trip to New York City. It was described how one morning while they were play fighting in bed, he all of a sudden turned on her. He grabbed both of her wrists and handcuffed her to a bar across the window. Allegedly, he forced her nightgown down and opened the curtain, then left the room, laughing at her. She was exposed to passerby, naked and cuffed to the bar for hours. Cheryl W. spoke of how she was traumatized by this experience. She was so afraid of the defendant, who attempted to calm her down, even though he was still laughing at her when he returned, that she pretended that everything was fine between them for the duration of their trip. But once she arrived safely back in California, she immediately ended their relationship. What is odd is that she resumed their relationship again in 1991 and was still friends with him after he relocated to Arizona. Now, this testimony I would not have used for the prosecution, but rather for the defense. It only shows that he had a twisted sense of humor, and yes, although the situation was abusive, he didn't physically assault her in any way. It also shows that he was never a real threat to her if she willingly became involved with him again, years later. Further, there was evidence to the contrary that she had not, at least initially, been an unwilling participant. There were several photos of the witness handcuffed to the bar with the curtain windows of the hotel room wide open. One explicitly showed her fondling the defendant's genitals while smiling. She stated that she did not remember doing this due to the trauma she experienced. Cheryl W. claimed that she had great difficulty in trusting and opening herself up to men after this experience, but this doesn't compute with the same woman who willingly entered into a relationship years after she allegedly escaped the same man. The only reason I discuss this is because this witness was ideal for the defense and could have negatively impacted the prosecution's case. Another incident occurred with a woman who identified herself as Nancy R., who was dating the defendant in March or April of 1989. She alleged that while at his home in Lake Forest, California, he forcibly pushed her onto his bed after she wanted to leave. She fell into a bookcase, hurting her back, shoulder, and head. Then, when she attempted to leave again, he pushed her back down, this time placing all of his body weight on top of her. Nancy R. allegedly fought him off for 10 or 15 minutes. Then the defendant spread open her legs, unzipped her shorts, sat upon her chest, and pinned her arms down with his knees. She claims that he then pulled her arms above her head and handcuffed her to the bedpost. According to her, he had never used them on her before, although she did admit that they were always on the bedpost. When he began to pull down her shorts and his own pants, Nancy was scared and she began to cry. She threatened him with going to the police for rape. The defendant immediately stopped, redid his pants, and released her from the handcuffs. He called her a bitch and said she had brought this upon herself. It left more than one kind of wound on Nancy. Her wrists were raw and scraped up from the incident, and she refused to see him for months after. However, she did get back together with him, and he promised to never use the handcuffs on her again, which he never did. The couple became engaged in early 1991. However, Nancy broke off the engagement that same year. Now, again, I think that her testimony would have been better suited for the defense, but both women's experiences did establish a pattern of the desire for sexual deviance, which he could not fulfill within his intimate relationships. Many cases of sexually motivated murders and serial killers, including that of BTK, amongst countless others, have shown that when a perpetrator is not able to find an intimate partner to share or be willing to participate in their games of bondage or other acts of sexual deviance, this can create an escalation of frustration and rage. These emotions can boil over and they seek an outlet for this release upon strangers. If I had been the prosecutor, I would have used these women's experiences to establish how this lack of fulfillment triggered the violent actions of the defendant. The rest of the defense's case was very strong, with more than 20 witnesses to testify as to the character and background of the defendant. These not only included his mother, brother, sister, neighbors, classmates from his childhood, but also friends, co-workers, and even a priest. His sister Marion also spoke of what a wonderful uncle her brother was to her daughters, and that he was very generous to her family and to their parents. A particularly interesting witness for the defense was a woman whom the defendant had saved from a man wielding a knife. I can only imagine how confusing it was for the jury to hear this woman's testimony of being rescued by the same man who, by all evidence the prosecution presented, was a monster. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I am beyond thrilled to be your host. Until next time, stay safe and watch out for Shades of Murder happening in the streets, next door, especially inside your own home. Shades of Murder is created, researched, written, and edited by Alita Caldwell. Original song Stranger, composed by Stereo Code.